there. It's wonderful for me to come and be with you and talk to you. This is a great symposium, I'll state when I'm done. But I have to add just like a footnote for Todd introducing me there, because those of you who know Todd here in his leadership position in this wonderful law school, that's not how I saw him. And I know Todd's now, shuddering at, what story I'm going to tell. Todd was one of the most effective advocates in Court of Appeals across the nation. I think, Todd, did you end up having been in every court in our Court of Appeals in our nation? So representing the United States in a diverse set of issues, Todd was one of the most effective. So the law school's gain was actually the loss of Department of Justice. All right, so what I'm going to do with you today, I have a thesis, and I'm going to try to explain my thesis to you and see whether or not you agree. And I realize that we have a diverse audience. Some of you are really schooled. Some of you could be here giving this lecture about environmental law. Some of you are coming in and listening to it. But here's my thesis, and I'm going to go back and try to explain it. I believe that our environmental law, I'm an environmentalist, I'm speaking unique to environmental law, really grew up in the 1970s and beyond. We're not that deep into our history, and it grew up largely through congressional statutes, and I'll try to explain what that meant and what happened. And that is my theory, and I'll talk about that as to how that happened and positive parts about that. But I'm saying, and my thesis to you is that has changed. And it's changing right now, and it's changing so that we no longer have this whole legislative apparatus that gives us our law, like the Ten Commandments from Mount Sinai or something. But rather, what we're seeing right now is bottom up. That things are happening because they're being pushed by people and other forces, and I'll try to explain that. All right. So, thesis. I have a thesis. That is, we changed from top down to bottom up, and that's happening around us. Okay, let's go. Let's start there. And so a lot of environmental law was born of tragedy. What you have here is kind of famous in our world of environmental law. This is the Cuyahoga River. It's outside of Columbus, Ohio. It's a great artery there. And in 1969, it caught fire. The river caught fire. Oil, debris, probably a spark from something there, and it was the front page of the New York Times. There you have LBJ talking about looking at Cuyahoga River there. And so this is one, there were others, but one of the impetus for the Clean Water Act there is that, public then looking at that and saying, this is not good, right? This is not good to have rivers burning there. Okay, this is very well known. It's in virtually every law book in the United States, Cuyahoga. There was a radio announcer in, I don't know, my lifetime, and he would end every one of his, radio stories and say, now here's the rest of the story. Who was it? Paul Harvey. Paul Harvey. So what's the rest of the story? This was actually at least the fourth time the Cuyahoga River caught fire. There have been 3 other times. And the question is, why didn't we have a Clean Water Act then? Why was it that event? Why was it that moment that is what, in fact, inspired the public and was really inspiring the public? What was different about that? Why didn't the other times? Same river, same fire, and nothing happened during that time period, and now here something happens. Ask yourself that, and we'll ask ourselves continuously. Ask yourself right now, why are not things happening? And so we'll try to figure out what the forces are that make things happen there. But these are not all, we have this extraordinary events in 1970 and beyond that give us laws. But if you look at this, virtually all of them in some way or another are born of tragedy. There. Superfund, Comprehensive Emergency Response Compensation and Liability Act, which is still one of the most litigated statutes in the United States, love Canal, for sure. There. Inspires everybody to come in. The Oil Pollution Act. Why do we have an Oil Pollution Act? Because when I used to litigate Deepwater Horizon was the Oil Pollution Act. Where did that come from? The Exxon Valdez crash. Exxon Valdez, drunken captain runs aground in Prince William Sound, pristine area. There's litigation, but Congress actually responds as well to the tragedy of all of that. Restore Act came out of Deepwater Horizon. And then in the 70s, what we think of as the pit bull of environmental law, which is the Endangered Species Act, was really a response to public outcry of species actually going away. Just not being there any longer, and we're responding to this. So a lot of environmental law, again, responds to tragedy, but it does respond. But today, the biggest secular holiday in the United States, celebrated by 192 countries, is Earth Day. But that was, of course, not true in 1970. In 1970, Gaylord Nelson, a senator, hires Dennis Hayes, who was a sort of an activist, college activist, to have teach-ins across the United States. They pick April 22nd. By the way, still true today. Why do they pick April 22nd? You guys are forgetting? You're in college. What happens in April? This is like spring break. So we have Earth Day across the world because of spring break in the United States. 20 million people show up on Earth Day of 1970. And things like I just showed you, things like that, come from that. Come from this enormous outcry, this enormous concern of people out there, and they demonstrate that, and it's true today. It's true today. We still now celebrate, all of our kids do that, and we know that's ingrained in us, but that's not how it started, right? That was a big deal in 1970, and it led to this. Here is the creation of Environmental Protection Agency. By what environmental president did that? He did it by executive order, not by legislation, creating a... Widger Nixon. By the way, this is just an aside, and I mean this as a tribute. John Dingell died yesterday. Dingell was one of the great authors of congressional statutes in the United States. Great authors there, and he's my congressman and somebody I knew personally there. I was doing for the Environmental Law Institute the oral history of Dingell. And asked him, come on, you're doing oral history, these are all softball questions, what president had the greatest impact on environmental law? And he said, because this is Dingell, he said, well, he was evil, comma, but... by the way, just because it's my law firm, I'm in the Beveridge and Diamond law firm, this is Bill Ruckelshaus, who was the first administrator of EPA. He actually founded our law firm. By the way, a little relevant to things happening today. How was he available to start our law firm? Because at that stage, Nixon calls the Attorney General. He had been then the Deputy Attorney General to tell him to fire Archibald Cox because Cox was, of course, running the investigation against Nixon there, and Ruckelshaus resigns. And instead of firing him, that becomes, of course, the Saturday Night Massacre. And he has nothing else to do, so he starts our law firm. Anyway, that's a pitch there. But Nixon also, come on, this is all stuff, this is to Richard Nixon, the Magna Carta of environmental law, National Environmental Policy Act, which also creates, by the way, the Council on Environmental Quality, all of that. This is all happening in 1970 there, and these are all game-changing events there. By the way, today, and I'll talk a little bit about this later, it's like 90 countries have the equivalent of NEPA. It might not be exactly, but this notion that I'm going to study environmental consequences before I make a decision is now ingrained in every leading country in the United States. But anyway, so we're doing all of that. And we do it not just because of John Dingell, but because, sort of hard to imagine, Senate now working together. That's hard to imagine, but it was true. During that time period, we have leaders of both parties. The Department of Justice, when they give their annual Environmental Leadership Award, it's called the Muskie-Chafee Award there. And these are two players in the Senate who were behind, pushing, looking at what was happening, looking at the tragedy, feeling the pressure of Earth Day 1970, and then springing forward again, what is the body of law we now call environmental law? But it came not, if you look at the vote counts during that time period of even the Endangered Species Act or the Clean Air Act, all those things that are now more controversial, those are overwhelmingly bipartisan decisions, but coming through leadership like that. So this is all still born of tragedy, environmental law being created. And when it does, then other things happen. I have said to others, so it's fun doing this in the law school, that actually the United States did not invent much law in a big picture. We got most of our law through Greeks and Romans and British people who, talk about contracts and criminal issues, property law way before we did. With one exception, we did invent environmental law. All those things that I'm showing you, all of that, those 1970, 1980 era statutes which form the body of environmental law as we know it today, we invented that. And then we exported it. We exported it to countries across the world. I travel a lot internationally. Again, I already told you that over 90 countries have NEPA, but our air programs of permit, our water programs of permit, virtually every country China has modeled that in some particular way there. So this movement of environmental law clearly emanated from the United States. I will also say, though, now some of the countries actually have things that are, we can learn from. There. They've changed, they're more modern, there's things that we can adapt to that we should learn from them. But certainly at the beginning, it came from us. There. Here too. You hire somebody like Todd Agard, one of the most successful environmental appellate lawyers in the nation, to come here and put together an environmental program, but it's true universally. Right now, there's not hardly a law school in the nation that does not have an environmental law faculty, an environmental law program. You have masters of law that exist. There are countless environmental law journals that in virtually every, many leading institutions. So this is, we now not only create environmental law, born of tragedy very often, but now we institutionalize it through our law schools, undergrad too, but largely law schools, and now there's a whole academic base that has grown up there. All of this, I still think, a top-down thing, because all this is coming through congressional statutes. And the federal government, always slow to react to these things, but it also evolves. So when I was at the Assistant Attorney General Department of Justice running Environment Division, I would say there were like 5 agencies that gave us probably 80% of all cases. The docket that I was responsible for was about 3,000 cases, but I say 80% of them came from about 5 agencies. This is audience participation. So what are those agencies? By the way, you can cheat and look at mine. You're wrong, right? Come on, I'm environmental. So what would be pretty much on your mind? Interior. Yeah, sure. But that was about 40% of the cases. The other 40%, another 40% from? Interior. Right, interior, because of Forest Service, BLM, National Park Service there. So the other ones are all smaller and sometimes hard to figure out. Commerce, because of? No. Right. The Army, because of? Corps of Engineers. Absolutely right. And agriculture, because of? Forest Service. So Forest Service is sort of the analog to BLM and Interior. Those where we got, and that grew up. Those grew up there. As Todd told you, I sort of grew up in the military. I assure you, every single service, every part of DOD has a designated environmental team now out there. Every single one. And so although those things came as a result of what we're talking about in the beginning, they grew up because we had statutes that turned into regulations, that turned into requirements that people had to do in order to improve the environment. That's how it happened, and that was a response to that. But in terms of how we as individuals look at environmental issues, and Gallup and Pew and other people have in fact looked at this now for decades, it has not been uniform. It has gone up or down. Now, in the top 10 of issues that the public has been concerned about for like the last 30 years, Environmental is there. Environment is constantly in like the top 10. But climate has gone down, up, down, up. By the way, when you have big weather events we have last year, more people are concerned about climate than they were in the past. They're sort of tied to that. But we have seen a sine wave curve, which is the oscillating factor in science. We've seen that in public perception of environmental issues, whether or not you care a lot or you're worried about the economic issues associated with things like climate change and what you're going to do to eradicate, what I think is still one of our leading problems in the world right now. That has not been constant. There. So I'm going to turn now and talk about the last polling data on environmental issues. Here it is. This is all Gallup. So question is, are we doing too much or too little? 9% of the population said we're doing too much. 62%, almost two-thirds, said we're doing too little. There. Is the quality of the environment getting better or worse? 33% said it's getting better. 61% said it's getting worse than it is right now. Are you an environmentalist? 42% of the public said yes. I consider myself to be an environmentalist. By the way, that wasn't defined. You've got to self-describe in that area. There. Are you in favor of strong enforcement of federal environmental regulations? Regulations being a watchword right now during this administration in particular. So are you in favor of strong enforcement of those regulations? 73% said yes. There. These now, the other ones, none of that really surprises me. Some of these do, the rest of them. Would you impose regulations to control greenhouse gas? Two-thirds of America said yes. One-third said no. How about this one? Would you support a carbon tax? 53% of America said yes. By the way, when I was at still when I was at Environmental Law Institute, I did the oral history of George Shultz. Shultz had been Reagan's Secretary of State, but he also been Secretary of Labor and head of OMB. And in that context, I asked him about carbon tax there. Now remember, this is a fellow who came out, he's a PhD economist. He taught at University of Chicago before he entered the administration. There, and he said, absolutely, I think carbon tax is, in fact, economically the way to go, but I haven't really got any traction in that regard there. All right, so all of those things now, that's the public perception of my oscillating curve, but what affects it? I'm going back to my beginning. What then affects public perception issues, and some of it is this. And so Deepwater Horizon is an event like, and in many ways, Exxon Valdez. In fact, because it catches the attention, 87 days of oil pumping into the Gulf of Mexico dramatically affects the 5 Gulf states economically, way bigger than the Prince William Sound economically, because it happens right during beach season. So the question then is, how does this fit? How does this fit in what I was telling you about this sine wave curve, public perception, statutes coming into being? Because it was an accident. Absolutely, it was an accident. And when I get to Volkswagen, I will distinguish between Deepwater Horizon accident and Volkswagen was not there. So the question then is, if this is an accident, how did it happen? And this becomes relevant later on when I'm talking about changes that are in effect now. So let's look at, let me explain what you're going to see first. So this is out of the movie Deepwater Horizon. This is Mark Wahlberg. It's sort of an action movie. It's roughly accurate, not perfect, but it's roughly accurate. So Mark Wahlberg is an engineer that's on the rig. Deepwater Horizon is the name of the rig that ultimately catches fire and goes off under into the Gulf of Mexico. His wife is Kate Hudson. He has a 10-year-old daughter. His daughter is writing a story about being on a rig and how things happen. And that's what you're going to see out of the movie. You're going to see Mark Wahlberg dealing with his 10-year-old daughter who's writing a story about being on the rig. She calls oil the monster there. And the monster then is caught beneath the ground and has a Coke bottle and uses a straw to demonstrate the well. So the straw is a well coming in to the Coke bottle. She then contains the monster under pressure with honey, but honey is in fact in the drilling world the mud, which is really a very specialized thing, holding again the oil under pressure, and then you'll see it happen, what happens to it. But remember, you're looking at how deep water happened, but you're looking at through the eyes of a 10-year-old. So let's run it. So I lost a piece of this, but I'll explain it to you. So what you saw, remember 20 people are injured, 11 people are killed on the rig. But part of it I lost, but I'll explain it because it's how it happened. And so using it, I should use a 10-year-old model, but I will not. So you have oil under extraordinary pressure. You drilled a well, you are successful, and that's what it's all about. That's what all of the financing was about in deep water. And then you're about to leave because you're dealing an exploratory well. This is not a production well, this is an exploratory well. It's a couple of miles underneath the ocean there, where everything is under, again, extreme pressure at that particular stage. So as you're leaving, of course, you have to plug the well. And you plug the well then with this mud, which is very highly programmed, which is, allows you to be flexible enough to get it down the well, miles below the ocean surface, and then harden so it will keep that from bursting and then causing the problem that we ultimately saw. So that is the theory of all of that. And it happens countless places. It's probably happening today, doing the very same thing in the Gulf that you're just seeing that didn't work here. Why didn't it work? A lot of different theories about that, but clearly the mud concoction did not hold the gas oil that was there. And there are pressure devices telling you all the time whether or not that's safe or not, and clearly those were not responded to in time to prevent the accident. So now all of a sudden you have what is called a kick. It's a kick of gas that rises up through that well. It is in fact explosive, and probably some spark, air conditioner or heat or something else on the top of the rig catches fire, and then it all explodes because this is all oil. there. So that was what, in the part that I was missing on the video, that's what the 10-year-old is showing with the Coke. So the Coke, straw, honey, and then shakes it up, and of course it explodes out of her Coke can, Coke bottle, showing again what really happened in that regard. This is a tragedy. It's an enormous tragedy that happens. And I say, you know, it catches American attention because 87 days you're watching the oil come gushing out of. By the way, I went there with the Coast Guard, and you could actually see miles away where it was happening because it's still erupting up, right? It's still coming up out of the water because of the intense pressure. At the Department of Justice, we had not done a case like this, not surprisingly, there. So we hired Canadian riggers to come in and teach us the sort of oil and gas 101 out in the Gulf because we needed that information as well. And at the same time they were there, they were also advising us because those of you watching it remember all that. There was, BP was trying to do a lot of things to correct that. Things like top hat, you're going to lower something right on top of it. And our rigger said, they're doing everything that we can think of and it won't work because it's very cold, the pressure is too great, and this has never happened before. Simultaneously, though, BP was digging a parallel well. They dig a parallel well that goes down the entire length, this leg, over a mile beneath the water, and then it goes parallel to the ground surface, another whole length of time, and it hits an 8-inch pipe. So I think it was trying to do. The rigger said, well, sure, we can do that. So the technology is rather remarkable in what was happening, and that's ultimately what stopped the rig. But then law takes over. Law takes over under those circumstances there because you have victims, right? You have victims, not only the people who died and were injured, but the public is a victim because of the economic losses during that time period. Thousands of people are put out of work. They close the entire fishing industry off the coast of Louisiana. But the environment, you and I, that's our environment too, enormously impacted with bird deaths, with displaced, turtle deaths. We had people that we had to bring into the area because each death is evidence. And so you had to actually take those birds and turtles and others that were dead and then take them to a central repository because ultimately they would be evidence in the case of showing harm to the public. By the way, why do you have to do that? Because actually the Gulf leaks oil all the time. And there's a lot of different oil accidents going on in the Gulf. And you can actually, by something equivalent to DNA sampling, you can actually tie oil droplets that killed a bird or killed a fish or killed a turtle back to that particular eruption. You can do that, and we had to do that in order to prepare our case because we had 3 trials on all of that, and ultimately settles. Ultimately settles the case. At that stage settles at what was announced as the highest settlement in history of the United States, $22 billion. Some of it going to the victims, but most of it going to the cleanup of the Gulf. And so something called natural resource damages, which those of you who in the world know what I'm talking about. The rest of you, it's really just trying to bring back the injured resource to where it would have been but for the polluting event, and that will take 20 years. 20 years of spending massive amounts of money in the Gulf by a group of federal and state officials. But it will happen. It will happen because the money is coming in. BP is, in fact, pays each year for the projects that are being put into effect. But that is what came out of. That's what came out of that whole top-down analysis that I was talking about, where we have laws respond to tragedy. The tragedies still occur. We have to have those, and we have to have those laws in order to have something that makes all of us protected and have our environment, because it's all of ours, protected as well. But now I am, transitioning. Now I am telling you that's what we did, but it's not what's happening now. And my example for that is called the Toxic Substances Control Act. So if you look at what's happened in environmental law, the last really big thing up until TSCA was Clean Air Act amendments that happened 15, 20 years ago. Nothing after that there. Why? Why is that true? Probably back to what we're talking about in Cuyahoga. Cuyahoga, there was in fact a outcry. It came at the right time. You had environmental leadership. You had bipartisan issues there, and it was pretty outrageous what was happening, right? River burning. We didn't have anything exactly like that. When we did, Congress responded there, but we really didn't have those same things now come forward. So why do we have TSCA? We don't have an environmental emergency that created that, and I do know the answer to that, and it's going to be, we'll see it demonstrated in some of my other slides, and that is you have the environmental community coming forward and saying this whole issue of chemicals and pesticides and toxic substances, we've got to do something. The old law is not good enough. And we have the industrial community saying we've got to change the law as well because of what's happening internationally. Internationally, we're having requirements in us put on by things in Europe called REACH. We're having to do those things, and we have to keep our law current with what's happening internationally. So now we have, instead of a top-down Congress saying we ought to reform the law, which, by the way, the law was not working for years. So everybody knew that, but it didn't change anything. What changed it is bottom up. Bottom up. We have NGOs, we have individuals, we have communities, we have the industrial community coming together and saying we need to change there. That drove change. And these are my areas. These are the things that I think, and I'm going to talk a little bit about it, drive change. You can pick and choose a bit out of all of that, but I think each one of them. So let's do one. State and local government, if you're looking at what's happening right now, we have attorney generals across the United States suing. They are suing on climate issues. They're challenging the administration on regulations there. We have local governments who are setting their own standards on recycling, setting their own standards even on pesticide issues. These are laboratory for change there. Some of them won't work, by the way. Some of them will be counter to some of the statutes that I told you are pretty effective. But they are laboratories, and it is happening right now. It's happening right this second, and some of that will ultimately cause national and even international change. So what's happening by state and local governments? I already told you that there's this clearly tsunami wave of things happening internationally. The Toxic Substance Reach Act is only one example, but in virtually everything we're talking about, climate issues and others, there's things happening international. Our multinational companies that have to comply with those laws come back sometimes and say we should in fact adapt as well. We don't like to have 2 different standards or 3 different standards or 5 different standards. We would like to have the U.S. standard be very similar and compatible, even if it's a higher standard to what's happening elsewhere. And also there's sometimes, internationally they're regulating things that we have not. There's a number of examples. Anyway, international requirements also in the future will drive change. Right this second, right now. And I spoke to this in the United Nations in December. They're creating something called, or trying to create something called an International Environmental Charter, which sets out forth basic principles internationally. A group of academics presented that to the Secretary General, and they looked at gaps in international environmental law. He has endorsed at least a concept of trying to have something like that, and the international community met in Nairobi in January to see whether or not we could have, by the way, this is not specific, these are goals, pretty high level goals, but we'll see whether or not we could get agreement on that on an international level. That's happening right now. I just left a conference here like a month ago, where for about $200 you can buy a handheld emission monitor there that will give you fairly good data on air quality wherever in fact you use it. And if in fact you do it correctly, it actually goes back to a web page in the United States that everybody is contributing to that gives you air quality issues geographically. That is happening right this second there. At Justice, we did a whole case in Colorado because there are oil tanks that exist everywhere. Come on, you've seen them. You have to store oil somewhere. But oil, if it leaks minor parts, you have something called VOC, volatile organic compounds, that are dangerous, but you can't see them there. So it's kind of hard to detect it. Somebody's put together a whole set of things that look like cameras that allows, like night vision goggles. You can put these things on and you can see the escaping gas and the companies, this is valuable, the companies don't want that to leak. They want to stop it, but they needed the technology to exist, and now it actually happens there. Over holidays, I went to Radio City Music Hall. Come on, you have to do that over Christmas at least once in your life. And I had kids and grandkids. You finish the grand December holiday show with things that look like stars that come out to the audience. They're not stars. They were drones. Little tiny drones coming out there. The ability, by the way, Down's issue of drones for sure, but there's a real positive part about being able to examine, being able to map, being able to see things. There are an enormous number of companies who want to use this to be able to monitor their own activity there. We're so close right now to being able to take our cell phone here, which would have an extension on it, which would allow any of us to put that into our drinking water supply and be able to test numbers on that. We are very close to that. Technology will drive change, as it has in the past, without question. That's why we have on our cars. That's why we have catalytic converters on our cars, because that drove change. But so will that happen in the future, for sure. So Todd told you I was a president of an NGO. I was a president of Environmental Law Institute. But there are plenty of NGOs out there. They come in all shapes and sizes. They come in all sizes. They get like-minded people who are looking special at particular areas. Some of them litigate, some of them don't. Some of them are internationally, some of them are domestic there. Some of you belong to some of the groups that I'm showing you there. They affect change. They absolutely affect change. They affect change because they are getting together people. They're shining a light on issues that we should all be concerned about. They lobby Congress. All of that happens there. So, and sometimes they're thought leaders. They're thought leaders because they're telling us, here are things that we can see happening in 20 years that we should be concerned about. There. So, like them or not, they absolutely affect change, and they will continue to affect change in the future. The area that many of us environmentally are still talking about and trying to get our hand on, it's one of the great areas happening right now. It is what you see in Google and Facebook and everywhere else. It is the analytical deciphering of having massive amounts of data and being able to now use and interpret that in ways. I can remember, geez, Todd, when we were at Department of Justice, if we had to manage 1,000 documents, that was like a big deal for us because you were doing this stuff on 3x5 cards. None of that happens right now. Now, in Deepwater Horizon, we were managing terabytes of information. A terabyte, think of the Sears Tower, and if that was individual pieces of paper, the Sears Tower is 1 terabyte of information. We had 8 terabytes of information coming into us, and we had to manage that. But you can do that now. You can do that because of software, because what you have in the computer power. But what does that mean environmentally? How is that going to affect us now that we can do things that we could never do before, domestically and internationally? We're all starting to get our hands about that. There's conferences going on right now. But without question, that data and analysis will affect us in the future there. And then sort of, I don't know. I don't know whether or not I should put this first or last, although I have one that because I'm a lawyer, you'll see why I did the next one. And here is this is New York City. This is climate conference. Now, when I left Department of Justice, not surprisingly, at the end of Obama administration on January the 20th, the next weekend, my wife and I were in Williamsburg with the Women's March there, and that's people. Think back to 1970, I told you 20 million people, celebrating Earth Day. We now celebrate Earth Day, but now people coming together on issues that they're concerned about. And no matter what anybody thinks, politicians watch that. They absolutely watch that. They actually watch the mail that's coming into them. They watch the crowds of people in front of their office who want to change. It has an impact, but so do these guys there. It's a wonderful system we have in the United States where clearly our courts are the envy of the rest of the world because they're independent, they're good, Yes, we have anomalies. Yes, we have, Supreme Court, whether or not it's the left side or right side or any of those sorts of things, yes. But they, nonetheless, anywhere you go in the rest of the world, our courts are held up as the best. Because, in fact, you can get answers, you can resolve disputes, and there's some predictability. They also affect change, again, without change. Why are we talking about climate change, anything other than a bunch of rallies? We're talking about climate change because the Supreme Court in Massachusetts versus EPA said climate is a pollutant that can be regulated. If they had not done that, we would not be having the same conversation. Because that turned it into, from just a theoretical policy statement to a legal statement. They have that ability. Sometimes we're going to like what they do, sometimes we're not going to like what they do, sometimes we're going to go to legislatures or people and try to argue that we need to have legislation that would overrule a court decision. Sometimes that can happen, but without question, courts affect change. And they're doing it right now. I just left, I spoke yesterday to the annual American Law Institute Conference of Environmental Law, Washington, D.C., and I was talking about the Supreme Court and courts and talking about what was happening at the beginning of this administration. And no matter what your politics are, one of the things that were happening were a lot of the policy issues that translated to like public statements got overturned by courts because of that something called the Administrative Procedures Act. It turns out that if you make a decision, it gets challenged. And if you don't make the decision, having given public notice and having taken comment by the public, then you violate the Administrative Procedure Act. That happened already. And it just indicates that courts matter in that area. And courts matter in a whole nother way, and that is in all of this, and remember Todd told you that I started out my career at the Department of Justice as a chief of enforcement, that in fact enforcement matters. So in my last year at Department of Justice, I was sitting around and I got called by the Environmental Protection Agency and said, quote, "You will not believe this." And then told me about Volkswagen. Come on, how many, I should ask you the question, how many of you own Volkswagens in your life? Certainly I have. If in fact you had a diesel Volkswagen in the last couple of years, this is more relevant. Anyway, this is the CEO of Volkswagen America testifying before Congress right after the scandal broke, which we then called Dieselgate.
You swear the testimony you're about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. Thank you very much. Chairman Upton, Chairman Murphy, Ranking Member Malone, Ranking Member Leggett, other members of the committee, thank you for inviting me here today to testify before the committee. My name is Michael Horn, and I'm President and CEO of Volkswagen Group of America, a subsidiary of Volkswagen AG, headquartered in Germany, in Moscow. I volunteered to come here before this committee at the very outset of these inquiries in an effort to show our commitment to cooperation. We have not had the opportunity to review all aspects of this matter. Indeed, the investigation is just beginning. Therefore, my testimony and my answers to your questions will be, by necessity, have to be considered preliminary and based on my best current recollection and information. On behalf of our company, my colleagues in Germany, and me personally, I would like to offer a sincere apology for Volkswagen's use of software programs that serve to defeat the regular emissions testing regime.
If you're the lawyer for Volkswagen, this is not a good day. Because you have just gone on national television, you have just testified before Congress to say, we cheat. What do they do exactly? It's somewhat sophisticated. Back into high-end technology, which just shows you can use technology good and you can use it bad. If you're bringing a car into the United States, there, you actually have to have a certificate of compliance. Environmental Protection Agency has a laboratory in Ann Arbor, Michigan that looks like a college campus. You don't actually bring your car in, you bring an engine into it. there, and that engine is supposed to be representative of all the engines of that class, and they test it on a dynamometer, and the testing is to see what the emissions are in something that they call mapping. It sort of looks like a drive that you and I would take out in the woods somewhere. You know, goes up or down hills, and makes left and right turns, it speeds up and slows down, and then they do emission testing in that regard. And if it passes the emission testing, then you get a certificate of compliance for that entire fleet of cars there. So Volkswagen did that. By the way, Volkswagen owns Audi and Porsche, which is relevant to that. So Volkswagen brings in their diesel engine, and it passes the test. So they bring in all of their diesels. What they did, and what he was apologizing for, is they have very good engineers, software engineers, and the software engineers figured out a way that they could sense the test. So they knew it was a test. And when they sensed the test, it reduced the nitrogen oxide emissions by 40 times. And then when it came off of the test cycle, then it went back to polluting to a little harmony there. So that is what was happening in Volkswagen. It was, in fact, a very sophisticated effort to evade U.S. Clean Air Act by engineering. And remember, I told you I wanted to separate, because I did both. I did both Deepwater Horizon. I led the negotiations there. I led the negotiations with Volkswagen. Deepwater Horizon was an accident, absolutely an accident in that regard. We had 3 different trials. We got asked under cross-examination. The Coast Guard actually ran the cleanup operations there, and there was a woman admiral, 2-star admiral, and she was asked, you know, what grade would you give BP once the accident occurred for cleanup? And she said, I give them an A, because I really think they did a good job. But it was because it was an accident there. And by the way, an accident that we thought was grossly negligent, but nonetheless an accident. Volkswagen was not. Volkswagen was very intentional at that stage. Now think about it. Why would you do that? Why would you, in fact, you know, violate the law? And it's all about market issues. One of the things that enforcement does, and why it's so important, why it drives change sometimes, is, you know, I'm in private practice right now, so I see corporations all the time. Corporations are asking me, how do I comply with the law? Corporations are also interested, if I am spending millions of dollars on things like catalytic converters, or I'm spending millions of dollars on trying to make sure I have a clean auto or a clean company, I kind of want my competitors to do the same thing. Why? Because if they don't, they get a competitive advantage on me. I am spending millions and sometimes $1 billion trying to comply with the law, but if I have a company who's not doing that, they're going to get a competitive advantage on me. At one stage when I was at the Department of Justice, we had cases that were in the South, this is criminal cases, where we thought the individual was testing underground storage tanks. By the way, underground storage tanks leak a lot, and so you have to have testing there to make sure they're not leaking, and you test them by figuring out how much, you know, water or oil is there in the tank is there, and then it isn't leaking out, which you can do by measuring it. And what we thought was happening was that, you know, some guy would show up, and they were all guys, by the way, and he wouldn't even get out of his truck. He would just fill in, you know, mighty fine underground storage tank and leave. Within about 6 months, they cornered the market on testing because they were cheaper than everybody else. They were cheaper because they weren't doing anything. So it wasn't just that it was illegal. It's what it did to the market. It hurt the market. It hurt good companies there. And Volkswagen, too. Volkswagen at that stage was jockeying with Toyota to be the #1 car manufacturer in the world. And so they cheated in order to have an impact on the hundreds of thousands of diesels in the United States. And so there is a place for enforcement. It has to be there. It does drive the train, and it is also a game changer. By the way, just as a side, since I did it, there ultimately, so what do you do in a case like Volkswagen? What we are enormously concerned about is that there were cars on the road that were polluting. Every single one of those cars was polluting, and the people driving it were victims, right? So it's a little bit hard to deal with at that stage. It wasn't like we were going to sue the car owners, but they were owning the polluting device. So it took us a better part of a year because, again, it wasn't just it wasn't just the diesel engines of Volkswagen. Some of those same engines had gone into the SUVs in both Porsche and Audi. So we had to do, different. We had 3 separate different consent decrees. But the heart of it was, in fact, somewhat simple, and that is Volkswagen agreed, because we sued them, that they would buy back or fix every single car and give money to every single car owner. And then we put 2 different pots of money, both of them in the $1 billion range. One pot of money went to the states, so they would do projects that would reduce nitrogen oxide, so that brings the environment whole. And the other one created a fund of a couple $1 billion for zero emission vehicle infrastructure. Because our view was that by cheating, because they were advertising their diesels as green cars, that skewed the market. And so less people brought ZEVs because it was actually somewhat cheaper to buy the emission pollution-emitting diesels. And so we created those sorts of things to bring the environment whole in that regard. And by the way, I won't go into that, but we also criminally prosecuted 7 individuals. It's a little bit hard because most of them were in Germany. By the way, the United States does not have an extradition treaty with Germany. And so the only people that actually have gone to jail so far are those people that were either in the United States or came to the United States, and we were able to have jurisdiction over them. But that's still going on right now. And the last, I didn't do it, but the last indictment was the CEO of Volkswagen. So he has been indicted. Again, not be tried unless the United States somehow gets jurisdiction over them. All right, so I want to just bring one term to your attention that's getting a lot of attention in my world, and I want to tell you about it because also remember, I think of this bottom-up change. One of them is this concept of private governance. Private governance are corporations doing things voluntarily to advance the environment for a number of reasons. You do it because it's good for your brand, it's good because you want to sell more cars. You have now people that are advertising, the environmental benefits of their particular car or their particular truck because you want to comply with the law. Hey, there's like a myriad of reasons why you're doing it. We're seeing big companies like Walmart and others that are very aggressive with their supply chain because they don't want to see human trafficking. They don't want to see fire violations in some of their companies. They don't want to see people that are somehow supporting terrorism because of the way that minerals are being harvested in Africa. All of those things are being affected right now in this concept called private governance. So hold the thought that private governance are corporations largely doing beneficial things voluntarily on their own for a variety of reasons. But it's getting a lot of attention right now, and it's another way of affecting change, because if you get a lot of corporations that are doing that, then it actually does, in fact, put pressure on the legislature to actually take advantage of things that are already happening. One of the areas right now is, I predict in 10 years we'll have mandatory reporting of carbon issues. Why? Because a lot of Fortune 500 companies are already doing it. They're reporting on their website their carbon emissions there, and if you have enough people doing that, then that drives change as well. All right, so what am I going to leave you with other than this is the statement of the woman that was at FTC and Procter & Gamble who talked about the importance and sustainability of private governance and how this is a way for the future. So what have I done? I told you this is how environmental law came together, born of tragedy. We've done a lot of things. A lot of good stuff is happening. It's clearly had an impact. I think, however, the future now is more born of all those other forces, NGOs, private citizens, people like you who want change. That's how we're going to drive it in the future. I used to talk about how it was important for my kids. Now I'm talking about how important it is for my grandchildren. I'm at that place. But every one of us are involved. And so we're hearing people like this. This is Pope Francis talking about the garden of the environment. Or the United Nations person, again, talking about what a challenge it is there. But that's not my favorite one. My favorite one is the long quote of Margaret Mead, who talks about, and you've all seen this before, that individuals in this space, individuals can and do make a difference. And it's not only theoretical, it is in fact how every single thing we've talked about, every single positive change somewhere happened with somebody, the Dennis Hayes or the Gaylord Nelsons or the John Jingle, who I honor today because of his Deb, all of them, somebody had an idea, and that idea sprouted into something good, and we're going to see that too. So thank you. My pleasure of talking to you. I'm going to stick around.